Welcome to the Engineered Perspectives podcast, where every episode offers you a different perspective on the diverse world of engineering. My name is Philip, and in this first episode, I'm interviewing Kaleb McKelvey. In his own words, Kaleb is a software engineer who focuses on exhibiting high character combined with strong ambition to continuously grow a little bit each day. Kaleb started his engineering journey at a telecom company while pursuing his degree at James Madison University. After graduating, he joined General Electric's Digital Technology Leadership Program, where he learned how to be a software engineer and a leader, and there he worked on a project that ultimately put him on his web development path. Kaleb's passion for personal finance then brought him to Northwestern Mutual, where he developed user interfaces for financial applications. After that, he joined Disney to work on Disney Plus and launch Star Plus globally. Finally, he joined Netflix on the growth team, helping people subscribe, where he still is today. Now please enjoy this conversation with Kaleb. So Kaleb, thanks so much for doing this talk, for giving me the time.
Yes, happy to be here.
So great. I wanted to start by asking you about your current main responsibilities at Netflix. Maybe you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, so at Netflix, I work on the growth side of things. So some of the main responsibilities I have, which is it's been a great time, is I've been starting to learn TV UI, which is what drives the TV UI app at Netflix. And I mostly work on the non-member side of signups and anything to help Netflix get more subscribers and get more people to enjoy the awesome content we have.
Okay, that's great. So do you work more on the user story side and like the design and like how to approach people, or is it more like the technical backside?
Yeah, good question. I mostly work on the engineering side. Netflix is really unique though, in that engineers are able to give a lot of good feedback on designs, and also if they have ideas of maybe this could work better, and it works with the product roadmap. Sometimes like engineering ideas also become A/B tests that we see. Hey, could this make the experience better for users?
So how big is the team that you're working with currently?
Yeah, the size of our team is 10 or 11 people with my direct manager, and then I'm part of a larger org of growth, which is a lot bigger. But my team is mostly focused on the UI platforms that drive the growth experiences.
How are the engineers distributed in that team, or are they all equal of the same position?
Good question. So there's different people that have specialties on the different platforms. So for example, like mobile versus web versus focusing on TVUI like I do. Um, we do sometimes switch though. Like that's totally fine if you have an interest and you're like, oh, I want to try out mobile or I want to try out web for me. Like I've done some web dev before at Netflix. And so it's totally something that helps engineers grow more and get a better vision of the overall uh, platforms that we use at Netflix and the dev experiences between the two. And that can be really helpful because you can take some of the best parts of one platform and say, hey, did you know TVUI does it this way? And maybe that influences how web drives their developer experiences in the future. Or of course the other way around too.
Do you have like frequent meetups or like talks where you exchange all those different kinds of approaches?
Yeah, great question. We don't necessarily have like direct platform to platform talks, I would say, but we do have team demos and team like brown bags. And that's just like an opportunity for us to learn, yeah, some of that experience part. But also there's just so many different things going on. It's a good way just to kind of keep up with what is the web team even up to right now, or the people focusing on web, what are some of the projects going on in that space. And so those demos really help us showcase what we're working on, but also allow us to get some more information on what some of the other teams are doing too, because we're not always working on the same projects at the same time.
Okay. So we have seen, especially in the last year, a large shift in technologies such as AI, the buzzword of the year, probably.
Yep,
Um,
yep, definitely.
and I wanted to ask, what do you think about the current state of AI?
Yeah, for me, it has been really interesting to like watch as someone that's in tech. Because when I think about like the Twitter world of AI, it's like everybody is like in AI, you're getting left behind if you're not using AI right now. But then if I ask my parents, like, when's the last time you used Chat GPT? Like they've barely even looked at the website. And so there's like this really interesting dynamic there of like AI taking over the world versus whether like what your profession is or what you do on a day-to-day basis. And so I try to keep that in mind to not make too much of like I must be doing this every single day just because it's popular on Twitter right now. And so my take on it at the moment is, yeah, I definitely think it's coming. It's getting better. Chat GPT is an amazing piece of software that you can use for debugging or explaining code, stuff like that. It's amazing. Same for like GitHub Copilot is really helpful. But when it comes to like the tool space, for me at least, it feels like there's so many different options right now that there hasn't necessarily been defined. You should use these for generating X. This is the best in the code space. I think it's like still really, really early to see where does the industry go and what are going to be the best tools that we use from it. And it's such an early area right now. I'm not diving and committing too hard on one of those tools because I want to keep an open mind and be able to use all of them.
Are you using any AI tools at the moment?
I mostly use ChatGPT. I try Bard every once in a while as well, and that's more on the personal side. I have used GitHub Copilot a little bit. I mean, they're both really helpful tools. I think that we're really far away from me being able to tell it, hey, I want this, and it just like creates the whole code base for me. I know there's some tools out there that do some basic landing pages and stuff like that. But at least in my opinion, a lot of my day job isn't necessarily the coding part. Like that's the end result of after we build up contracts, after we make sure everything's supported across different systems that we're, for a new feature or something like that. And for me right now, it feels like AI can help me do my programming job a little bit faster. It can help me get a new doc, like some of the baselines of a Docker email and get that formatted in like a baseline or outline really quickly. And then the last thing I really like about it is like if you have like I know we'll talk about writing a book later, but it's really helpful for like new ideas of how to like write a paragraph or different words to use. And I really, really, really like that piece of it the most.
Yeah. Are you afraid that it will lighten your workload too much and you might even get worse in those skills in the long term?
Yeah. It's an interesting question. I don't know. I think it's kind of like, to me, when I first learned to program, we used something called JGrass, which was basically like a text editor for Java. And then when you actually get into workforce and you're using like an IDE in Java, like IntelliJ or something like that, like if you can imagine what it was like when IntelliJ first came about, when people were using text editors, I'm sure there was some of that same fear. But at the same time, you're like, well, this is going to make me a lot faster. And for me, every single job that I've ever worked at, there's usually a limited amount you can do based on the amount of devs you have, the product features, and and like the priorities of those. And so at the end of the day, if we can code faster, it just means we'll be able to do more on those product roadmaps each year. And for me at this moment, I don't feel like it's going to be like I'm not doing anything at all day. But hey, I've been wrong before.
Do you see any other dangers in using AI, except maybe that learning skills will be less learning and more using?
Especially the thing that I worry about the most probably is the bias. Like if you read anything about how AI develops its own biases, that is pretty scary, especially when you're moving really fast in a space and there's definitely like these unknown things like biases or how the algorithm's actually working sometimes that makes you feel like, oh wait, should we be slowing down a little bit? So I guess that's probably my biggest fear. I have also seen iRobot, which is a movie with Will Smith, where the robots end up creating their own laws and kind of starting to like regulate when humans can go outside and stuff. So I really hope that never happens because if you watch the movie, it's kind of scary. Yeah,
Yeah.
to think about.
Okay. Well, that's a good point. So maybe let's shift the view to a more general situation. You've probably worked with some of the best engineers in the world. Are there qualities that most of them share?
Ooh, yeah, it's a good one to think about. I would say there's different types of engineers that I've worked with. There's really like awesome engineers that have like a specialty in the technical realm, where they know. We can use JavaScript as an example. There's like some of the best engineers that just know JavaScript inside and out. They have the intuition of great architecture when you're making a new web app. And so they have like the technical side, and that's like one way that you can be an awesome engineer. The second piece, and one that I personally kind of bias towards, is I think that it's really, really challenging as engineers sometimes to develop soft skills and leadership skills and persuading people to the view that maybe you have, and also being able to admit when you're wrong. And so I think for me, some of those qualities are just as important as the technical side. And the people that I would say have been my role models that I've worked with, they usually have a good baseline of technology. They don't necessarily have to be experts, but they have persistence, they have grit, and they will figure out if they don't know something, which is great. And then on the other side of it, when you're working with them, it feels like a positive experience, even though you might disagree on something. And to me, I kind of think if you get in a disagreement over something with someone, and at the end of that disagreement, even though maybe you didn't get your viewpoint as the one that we move forward with, if you're working with people and at the end of that disagreement, you still feel happy and you felt like you were heard, you felt like the discussion went really well, and at the end of the day, you made the decision that was best for the team. To me, that's qualities of what like really good engineers are able to do, where they might not necessarily um, agree with your point, but they will work with you to figure out why and then figure out the best path forward. And to me, that kind of boils down to you're putting like a us versus I mentality forward, especially on a dev team. And so I've really, really appreciated engineers that I work with. And I found at Netflix, many of us, I would say actually everybody I've worked with at Netflix has that mentality of what's best for Netflix, how can I help the team, and it really makes it a really happy place to work because you feel like you're working towards something with that's bigger than yourself with people that are doing the same thing, and when that happens and comes together, it's just to me that's like the beauty of tech and the big systems that we work on.
Do you think these skills are learnable?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Because I mean, even myself, like, right, like I've been in the game like 10 years now. I was really fortunate because my first role was in a leadership at GE at General Electric, and it wasn't necessarily dev focused. It was actually like leadership focused. And so I was able to learn a lot from the great leaders at GE, and we got feedback. We led committees, we led projects. And what you find is those skills are really transferable once you get into more of a technical role. And to me, not that I've worked in tech that long, but I feel like dev teams, especially as Agile and Scrum is adopted like more and more. It's like pretty common nowadays. I feel like our roles as software engineer has changed in that respect because you are always working as a team towards something, and I think there's a lot less of the lone wolf in the that's in the corner doing things by himself without necessarily talking to anybody or working together with other people. So I think they're definitely learnable, and I think they're a really important part of being a software engineer today.
If we are talking about a teacher, a peer, and a student, what qualities are you looking for in each of them?
Okay, let's think.
Maybe we
A
can start
teacher,
with the
a
teacher.
student. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Good idea. So what are some of the qualities I'm looking for in a teacher, like from a software engineering like mindset?
Yeah.
Hmm. Patience.
That's a good
I think
point.
is like a really important one. Yeah, you, especially as you're learning something new, I kind of think of it as like when I'm helping my parents set up, like when I used to have to help them set up a new printer or something. It's like, yeah, it's not necessarily that difficult if you've done it before, but when you're not familiar with it, right, you got to like really think about the steps, like one by one, and you can't. It's kind of like teaching someone to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich that's never seen bread before. And so I think patience is really important. And then the second thing I look for in a teacher is like credibility, right? Because anyone can technically be a teacher in like the tech world, right? You can start your own blog, you can write on LinkedIn. Actually, I was in a space yesterday on Twitter where we were talking about this a little bit, where there's people that have learned to code but never went through a tech interview, but actually are teaching people how to get through tech interviews. And it's like that credibility, it's not necessarily that the information is not valuable, but if you don't have the experience or maybe the credibility to teach from some of your own experiences or your expertise, then maybe you might be teaching me the wrong thing, and I'd rather not go down the wrong path if I can help it. um, and then the last one I would say is just being very respectful. um, I did singing lessons in the past, and the thing that was the hardest for me, especially as an engineer, is like relax and be vulnerable and just try something new. That's really, really difficult, especially when someone's watching you. And so, as a teacher, you want someone you can feel comfortable with, and you feel like they have your best interest at heart, and they're not there. And if you fail, they're there to help you, not like judge you for it. And so, I think that from a teacher standpoint, that's really important in tech, especially because there's not that many right answers. It's very like creative field. And so having a teacher guide you through that is really, really helpful when they're being respectful.
How do you make sure that the credibility is accurate? Because I think that can be quite hard.
For sure, for sure. I would say I would approach it similar to one of the people I like reading is Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's business partner for Berkshire Hathaway, and he's just known as like a really, really smart critical thinker. And so for me, it's similar when you go to like a doctor or something like that. That is you can learn some of the general ideas, or like you can even research, like, if you hurt your ankle or something, you can research some possibilities there. It's not necessarily to question the doctor or act like you know more than a doctor, but similar for JavaScript, you can learn some of the basics and the fundamentals, and I feel like you can use that to gauge whether someone knows at least as much as you do, to start off with that credibility. And then, even though it's not the best way to gauge, but I do think your experience and your companies you've worked for, or the projects that you've worked on, give you some credibility too. But that one's a little bit unfair because depending on how long you've been in your career, you just might not have had those opportunities yet. But that doesn't mean you can't be a teacher in something. And so, yeah, overall, I think I would use those as gauging whether or not someone's credible, and start with the big ideas first.
So, talking about peers, would you say the same thing just applies to peers? Because peers can be teachers, or would you say there's a different thing?
Yeah. Oh man, I would definitely say they're teachers though, because I've definitely learned a lot from peers throughout my career, and learned something new from like the brilliant software engineers I work with at Netflix. Um, I would say it's not like I've ever researched credibility or anything on any of my peers, so I don't think I would look into that as much. I think you can feel the people that you work with over time, how well their ideas are like resulting in whatever you're trying to do at the end of the day. So for an example, if you're building a new web app from scratch, and your peers and you are discussing the different architectures, and someone on your team is really, really adamant about a certain architecture, and say that eventually that's what you choose, you're going to find out pretty soon throughout that process whether that architecture choice was one that worked well for the team or not. Thankfully, in tech, you can always switch and change. But I think as you go through those architecture decisions and you go through discussions, you go through PR reviews, that's when you start to understand the different expertise from the people you work with and where you can learn the most from them. And so it's like kind of more an implicit expertise from your interactions with them, versus like, hey, I see that you work in React, can you teach me this? It's kind of like teach through the experience of doing things together.
Yeah, I think you don't expect to learn so much from your peers because they are your peers, not your teachers. So it's always
Right,
nice if
right,
you
yeah.
do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, especially when it's when you have the opportunity to work with someone that's a lot smarter than you, has like a lot of leadership skills,
Yes.
and then you can watch them and emulate and learn from them. And I've been fortunate to have a lot of that in my career where they weren't directly teaching me, but indirectly I was learning a lot, which has
Yeah.
been a
I
good
think
thing.
peers can definitely become teachers. It's almost fluent.
That's true. That's
S-
true. Yeah,
s-
yeah. It's kind of like a transition.
Yeah. So now you are the teacher and you have a student. What qualities are you looking for in a student, someone you invest your time in?
Yeah, I will say as someone who's been a mentor for different people throughout my career, that one of the main things I've enjoyed when I'm helping someone or someone's asking me to be a teacher for them is they are curious and they hold themselves accountable for whatever they're trying to do. And so I think just being reliable and accountable is probably the main thing, because as a student, you are asking someone to help you and give you actionable advice most of the time. Um, and I'm not necessarily meaning that they should 100% agree with everything you say and do everything you say. But there is definitely pieces there where if you tell someone, hey, you have an interview coming up, here's how you should prep. If you send me a doc with some of the answers to behavioral questions, I can let you know what I think about them from my experiences. And when people there's students that you'll have that will actually send you that doc, and then you learn from each other and you help them maybe answer questions a little bit differently. Or there's some that you give them some actions and they don't do it. And so as a teacher, you can't force anyone to do anything. But I found that when someone's asking you for advice and you're a teacher, the ones that actually follow up and follow through and are accountable for what they're asking you for, have the most success in those relationships. And so, like, you can think of like school, right? Teachers give you assignments. There's going to be people that do them and some that don't. And then, hopefully the people that do them end up with a good grade and they learn a lot and they can use that information in their careers.
Do you have a strategy for picking mentees?
Ooh. Generally no.
Okay.
I'm someone who wants to help like pretty much I want to be as helpful to people. Um,
That's
and I
great.
would say because yeah, I can only help so many people like at a time, like time wise. And so I think my goal in life is because as so many people have helped me in my career and gave me that time. So if I can pay that forward through like official mentorship programs, or I did mentor crews before where people come and ask you for help. Um, and so yeah, I'm really willing to help anyone. I don't have like strict requirements. The only thing I usually try to start with is figure out what their goals are and what they're trying to do, because as a mentor, I don't want to sign up to be a mentor to someone and waste their time if I have no idea how to help them for the task they're trying to do. And so that's kind of like the prerequisite is I never will give someone advice if I'm not sure of that advice myself or wouldn't follow the same advice. And so that's kind of not necessarily a requirement on them, but just their goals of what they're trying to learn.
Usually, if someone asks, how do I become a good engineer? How do I become successful, career, all that? What do you tell them? What is your approach?
I my first thing that always comes to mind for my own career, as someone who came from a small town in the U.S., who didn't have like a programming class in high school. Our tech class in high school at that time was like learning Microsoft Excel and Word. Yeah, I mean this was quite a while ago, like 20 years ago or so. But okay, maybe 15. Not to date myself, but too far. So for me, it's always been grit and persistence has been like an important part in my own journey, and just by that I mean learning to program is really, really challenging. It's like literally like learning like another language. And so there's going to be moments where you're like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what to do next. I need some help. And so that happens a lot. In your career, you'll get really hard and tough bugs that you might not be able to figure out in the first try. So you have to fight through those. And then, of course, technical interviews is all about grit. It is not that fun to wake up early before work, practice leak code, practice your interview questions, and then go to work and code all day. Like that takes a lot of grit and a lot of persistence as well. And so I think that's one of my main things I think that helps people be successful in their career. And then the second one is, for me, as someone who played sports a lot when I was young, getting feedback from your coaches to be better was like a constant part of that. Good thing in our careers, people are generally nicer than how coaches yell at you during like a football game or something like that. But for me, that's been like really helpful is find people that, and I got this advice early in my career, is find people that you respect and people that you see are doing really well. And you're like, wow, if I had the same characteristics as they do and the same knowledge as them, I wouldn't be mad at, I would be pretty happy of where I got to in the future. And so if you see people like that you have that respect for, starting to emulate and learn from them is like a really, really awesome way to, I don't want to say shortcut your career, but it's a way to definitely hack on how to get better faster.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people are afraid of the interviewing part of accelerating their career. Do you have any tips for being good at interviews? First, the interview part, of course, as a student, but also as someone who interviews other people.
Yeah. From the student perspective, I think it's prep as best as you can. There's a lot of different questions that can be asked. There's a lot of knowledge that you need for these interviews. And so I usually try to split it up from tech prep, of like doing leak code and that kind of thing. And then I also prep pretty hard on the behavioral interview side because I want my answers to be sharp. I want to be able to show companies that based on what they're looking for, I can match that. And here's how I've matched it in the past. So I think the prep part is really important because for me as an interviewer, like switching to the other side of the question, is you're looking, when you're an interviewer, your goal is to find someone that matches the role and can contribute and do well in it. And so you're not like a bad guy in that process. You're just trying to gauge that from the person you're interviewing. And so from my perspective, someone who is prepped and has practiced and can work through problems and communicates well, you're gonna have a lot better of a fighting chance for that. And as an interviewer, I personally feel like you can tell a little bit when someone has prepped versus when someone hasn't. And so, not saying that's like the yes or no, I'm gonna hire this person or not, or give them a yes. What I can say from the people that feel like they prepped well, they usually do well in the interviews. And, that kind of goes back to the sports analogy of just like perfect practice makes perfect. And so if you practice well, then the interview, you're going to do better in that interview because you've worked through that before.
Would you say you would invest more time into practicing the questions themselves or maybe the concepts around them?
Yeah, good question. I personally, what I've done is I make a list of like all the data structure and algorithms that you kind of need in an interview. And then I break that down. And so I'll start with like, well, not necessarily these days. I know arrays a little bit better than in the past, but that's what I used to start with, is start with arrays. And then I'll move on to maybe maps and sets. And then like I go down the list. And so what I usually do is I start with just being able to create those data structures from JavaScript myself. Like even though JavaScript has a map class, I wouldn't use it. I would start with actually making my own map class just to get the internals of those data structures. And then I would take that and then I would go to LeetCode and look for questions for maps or whatever that like the category is. And then that way it gets me a little bit familiar with the structure of the questions of answering with a map. Because sometimes those data structures, if you use the right one, can really, really, really help you in those questions. And so I try to pattern match that through the prep process when I'm working through that data structure.
Yeah, that's a great tip. I think that's a great approach in general. If you just do it yourself, if you can't teach it yourself, you probably can apply it to other problems.
Exactly. Yeah. And leak code is such a like vast amount of really difficult problems that sometimes it's not necessarily getting the right, in my opinion, you don't necessarily have to always get the exact right answer. It's sometimes matching what is the data structure, what should I try to use. Because in my opinion, a tech interview, it's not necessarily to say, here's a problem, fix it immediately. And 100% of the time you get it right. Like all of my interviews is like like a process of working through those difficult problems of like, I think one of the hardest leak code questions is like the graph problem with airplanes or something where you have to set up a graph to find like the shortest distance between airplane or airport codes. And it's just like if I got that one in an interview, I'm not gonna lie, I always struggle with that, and I'll probably need some help as I get through it. But at least after practicing it on leak code, I know it's a graph problem, and I know where to start. And hopefully, the interviewer can give me some tips to get me through the whole solution. And I accept that feedback. I communicate well with them, and even though I'm nervous and under pressure, I can somehow show that I know what I'm doing a little bit.
Yeah, there has been some general saying about is tech interviewing the right thing to do, and that would lead me to a statement that you tweeted some time ago, and it is it best practice or just current practice we are all following? And I think when I read this, I was like, okay, I can definitely see the point of that statement. Do you have any context for this?
Yeah, good question. I'm actually really working on a talk right now. I'm going to be doing a talk at a meetup about this. I forgot where this came from of like why I made that statement. But
Okay.
when you think about just like React over time, if you just look at the history of it a little, it's like we started, and I wasn't even part of it at this point, but you start with like create element. Like you actually created the React elements yourself. And then eventually JSX was introduced. And so everybody had to transform the best practice of create element to now I'm using JSX as the best practice. And then JSX is around, and then people are like, how can we start composing components better? Oh, we're going to have container components that are like dumb and then like business logic components. And that worked okay. And that was the best practice. And then next thing you know, we're doing high order components, and that's the next thing. And then after a while, you look at the console log of high order components, and it's just really hard to read the component structure because it gets so nested. So then people started using render functions, and that was the next best practice. And then there's class versus functional components, and use memo or not, or pure component. And then now we moved on to hooks. Hooks became the best thing. And then throughout all of that, now we're getting close to React Server components, which is the new thing that we're going to be doing. And so for me, um, as you review PRs, as you collaborate with people, as you try to figure out the best architecture for a certain problem that you're fixing or implementing a new feature, a lot of times as engineers, we're trying to do what's best, like the best practice. And for me, I think I've gotten to the point in my career where I will not usually die on that hill of this is the best practice right now. Because at the end of the day, our job is to solve a business problem. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. And as our code bases change over time, those best practices are going to change. And so I stopped really, really fighting hard for this is the best way, this is the right way to do this. And instead, it's generally more like here's a couple options, and we're going to make some trade-offs and we choose this one for right now because maybe that's the best one based on time, based on resources, and based on the current practices that our repo is using. And so that's kind of the idea behind it's not necessarily best because for me, best is like, why, if it's so best, why do we change it? It's really just current as we're learning more. And that's totally okay. And I'm fine with that. And I'm happy to learn and grow and adapt and get better. But it doesn't necessarily mean I was doing something the best before.
Do you just accept new standards such as React Server components, or do you really look at them, maybe think about can you even use it?
Yeah. It's a little harder from a company perspective, in my opinion, because as something new like React Server components come out and like Next.js starts going from experimental to like now it's in prod, um, it's difficult to get a whole code base all of a sudden using something new. And I think generally companies lag a little bit from like whatever the new thing is. And I think that's good because then it gives a little bit more time to figure out what are some of the edge cases and like the downsides of going this route. Because when something's brand new, a lot of times the examples used for that, whatever that new thing is, are kind of like isolated and here's the best way to use it for right now based on some of the ideas that we created it with. And so for me, I want to know what does that look like long term, and are a lot of people adopting it before I start using it? Because the worst thing that can happen is you start using React Server components, and then everybody else is like, actually, never mind, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And that's like not a fun situation to be in. So yeah, I think generally speaking, for company code bases, I'm going to go a little bit slower than on my personal projects, because personal projects, it's a little bit more, it's kind of your own world and you don't have to worry about the consequences quite as much. And then the code bases are smaller.
So do you like the direction that React is going at the moment?
I haven't personally touched the React Server component stuff too much yet. I'm kind of waiting right now. Well, I'm waiting for summer to be over because I like to be outside a lot during the summer. And so once winter comes back, I'll probably start redoing my portfolio that I've been saying I need to do. And so I'll test out the React Server components a bit. But for me, I do like the idea a lot of shipping less of that to like less of that stuff to the client and having the client have to figure everything out. So if there's more work being done on the server, then it seems like a good thing to me. I would say the challenges I've seen with that kind of architecture in the past, not that I've used it too much, is but sometimes that coordination between the two is where the edge cases start cropping up, and you can start having to do some hard things to make it work together. So hopefully React Server components, makes that easier for us, and those edge cases are few and far between. And then the second part I will say is it kind of reminds me, if you've seen Astro at all, of like the island architecture where it's like only certain pieces are shipping the JavaScript. And so I kind of see them similar in my mind so far, even though I haven't used both, just from the reading I've done about them. And those both sound like wins for the user. So I'm always for that.
Yeah, that's great. I have a second statement that I would like to cite. It's striving for perfection in software engineering leads towards better outcomes, but expecting perfection leads to frustration. And I think a lot of engineers can see themselves in there. I think it was also on Twitter where you wrote this. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Man, it's so weird to me, my own like my own tweet, like to talk about more. It's awesome. Thanks for reading on Twitter. It's really cool. I this kind of goes back to the same thing of like best practice or current practice and perfection versus doing what we need to do to get like a feature out. And so for me, I think perfection has always been something to strive towards, whether it's in tech or in your life. But at the end of the day, your code base is never going to be perfect, and we as people are never going to be a perfect person. And so I think when you think about your code base and yourself as you go through life, you have to forgive the mistakes, like in your architecture or mistakes in life. And you have to give yourself grace. And the best part of both, I think, is that at the end of the day, you can always adapt and change or go back and maybe change the way you view the world or view your code base. And so I think for me as a dev for a company, your goal at the end of the day still comes back to trying to keep a clean code base that can continually be iterated on so you don't slow down product development. But at the same time, you are trying to provide business value because that's what you're getting paid for. And so sometimes you can't have a perfect code base to achieve that feature, but you can get good enough to where you can still iterate on it, you can make adaptations to it, and maintain it okay. And so even though it's not perfect, it's good enough from the company perspective. And at the end of the day, if users are okay with it and it's not super slow or any of those types of things that make a bad user experience, then I think it's good enough. And that way you don't feel too frustrated that you're not all of a sudden using React Server components for everything.
So you rely a lot on user feedback for good enough?
Oh, good question. Um, I would say for me, I mostly am relying on the designers I'm working with for like the UX part of it. And then from the tech side, is at the end of the day, right? There's definitely principles of good architecture to try to follow, especially for like React Dev, whereas like we try to compose things instead of just write huge pieces of the web app. Um, and so I feel like you can achieve that code base where you can get good enough with the component structure. You can get good enough with the user experience and the loading times. You can get good enough with like keeping your code dry, for example. And so there's definitely things that you can achieve and do well, but it doesn't necessarily mean your whole code base is perfect. And I think that's something that is the older I've gotten in my software engineering career, the more I've been like, you know what? That's okay. We can come back and fix this if we get time and we can make it better later. Um, as long as it's not like really, really awful to maintain and change in the future, then I think we've done a pretty good job to get this feature out in a certain time.
Yeah, the intuition that comes with experience is probably a good indicator for the good enough.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. And I feel like too, when you've gone through the cycle of a new feature enough, you start to see that there's always going to be pressure from the business on getting something done faster. And from a tech side, you can only push back so much because there's only so much return of investment on some of the tech decisions we make. And so that's why I think striving for perfection is trying to do the right thing as best as we can is awesome. But if your expectation is that no matter what feature we do, we're always going to do it in the perfect way, then that's where you're going to be frustrated and it's going to be challenging because doing it perfect, but also providing business value sometimes can clash with each other. And so that's where the difficulty comes.
Yeah, that's a great insight. When I read your blog, I saw some articles about productivity, and that's the next question I want to ask. Are there any productivity tools, routines, habits that have 10x your life?
I would start with something that really made a big difference in my life was just coming up with like a high level plan of um what I even want, because if you have some direction, then each day you can make decisions a little bit easier towards what it is that you want to achieve. And so whatever that means for you, that's like a way to spend your time a little bit better. It's a little bit of a way to have more purpose in your life of what you want to do. And so by coming up with that plan and also just coming up with like a simple mission statement of your life, I think has been like a big important part of how I approach productivity, because it's a little bit easier to say I'm not going to do this because it doesn't match with what I want to do in the future. And that's totally fine. But if you don't have that plan or that direction kind of at least in mind, it doesn't have to be perfect, then it's a little bit easier to let things outside of what get you closer to your vision take up your time.
Do you mark those with certain time stamps when you want to achieve something, or is it really like a vision that you just write down?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a mix. I started with just a mission statement of like, what do I? It's kind of like the Steve Jobs quote. I think it is. I think it was Steve Jobs where he like looks in the mirror and he's like, make sure if what he does every day matters and what he wants to do. And if he didn't, he would just do something else. I forgot the exact quote, but it's basically like making sure you're using each day to the fullest. So I kind of started out with just, I know one thing I want to do is make like a positive impact on the world. And so for me, Netflix is doing that through the entertainment that it provides people and the stories that it's telling. And so that was like a big reason why, for me, Netflix was like a company I can say I will proudly work for you. Um, and then the second thing is I want to be able to help people. And so whether that's doing podcasts, blog posts, talking at conferences, mentoring, like I know I'm okay using my time in that way because I know that helping people is something that's important to me. And then the last thing that has helped me is just I knew I wanted to have strong relationships with the people in my life, whether it's having fun at work with coworkers, whether it's my wife, my friends, my family. I wanted them to know that I'm here and I never would let work be the main priority over them. And so like those three things drive a lot of how I like live my life and what I prioritize. So that's what I started with. And then, yeah, I do recommend people come up with like 1, 3, 5, and 10 years as far as a plan. And it's definitely way more cloudy in the 10-year. It's kind of like just a guess at 10 years. But I have came up with milestones before. And like I feel that when you mark those off, it's just such a great feeling when you're like, I really wanted to do this in 5 years and look, it's actually happening. And then the last piece I'll say is if you have those bigger goals, then you know you can come up with some daily habits that, or weekly habits, for example, that will help you get there. And so, like, I try to call one of my friends at least every other week. It might be a different friend, but that will help me make sure that I'm keeping up with them, as an example. And so I think all three of those kind of come into play with how you spend your time on a daily basis. And that's what's really been helpful for me as I think about what, if I was in a casket and people were talking about me and I want them to be able to say happy and good things about me, then here's some of the reasons why. And I hope, I'm living that now.
And do you use any tools that keep you accountable? Any note-taking apps? Any there are so many apps for that stuff. Do you use
Yeah,
any?
definitely. Yeah. I really have fell in love with Notion. The only downside with Notion is there's no encryption and like locked pages. So if there's something really private, I would not put it in Notion. OneNote is what I've used in the past, and it does let you lock stuff, so you can have a little bit more protection there. And then, believe it or not, I have like a paper.
Oh,
I
that's
think
great.
it's something. There's just something around writing it and like putting it down on paper, and revisiting it like every year. Yeah, it's not the most technical, but it's kind of cool just doing it old school sometimes. And then for Notion, I really like the to-do list. Like I just use like a database or something like that to track a project over time. And so yeah, Notion has been my go-to right now.
Have you tried Obsidian?
I've heard good things, but yeah, what happens is you get locked in. It's kind of like vendor lock-in. It's really hard to get things out once you start using one really fully, and it's a process to get out. But I've heard good things about Obsidian that I really want to use it.
Yeah, I
Do
think
you use it?
yeah, I started using it, but usually
Nice, nice.
mostly because of the Vim feature. You can use Vim in Obsidian, and it's
Nice.
markdown only. It's like markdown files, so it's not.
Gotcha.
Yeah, you can use it offline. There's no cloud. You can pay for it, but you can. It's basically your own
Okay.
data. You can do what you want with just markdown files, and then you have all the linking. So it's definitely worth a shot, I would say.
Okay. Yeah, I might try it out. It's been on my list of like as winter comes when I'm inside a lot more of like explore it because yeah, I do like Notion, but I think the data of like not being able to lock anything is sometimes a hindrance of what I'm trying to do because I don't because you have to use something separate for X when really you don't like the point you have Notion for is so you don't have to do that.
Yeah, Obsidian you can use completely offline and just never update the app. So if you want to.
Oh wow. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check it out again. Thanks. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
Um, so the next thing is books. Maybe we can start with reading books. So, do you have favorite books, especially technical books, then non-fictional books and fictional books?
Yeah. I'd also love to hear yours on this one too, just
Okay,
like some of your
okay.
favorite books. Yeah, I would love that. Technical for me is I would say some of the books that were really helpful for me was You Don't Know JS. Is a really good JavaScript book. And I believe it's free on GitHub unless that's changed. There's the big data one. I have to get the name here. Look at my site real quick. It's around big data and applications. So let me get that for you. Oh yeah, designing data intensive applications. The big ideas behind reliable, scalable, and maintainable systems. I really like that one. And then I read The Phoenix Project, which was a fictional novel, but it kind of shows how we got into the agile DevOps type mindset for developers. And when when you read the book, it can resonate with some of the challenges you might have had in your technical career. So I really enjoyed that one too. For the nonfiction books, I really like Atomic Habits. Make sure that's the right. Yeah, Atomic Habits was a really helpful book for me. There's a book that's popular for personal finance in the U.S. that's called The Millionaire Next Door. So I always recommend that to people just to learn a little bit more about the mindset of um, living life in a positive way, even as you want to accumulate your wealth. And then um, another nonfiction book that's been helpful is Stumbling on Happiness. Is a really good book. I cannot think of the author's name off the top of my head though. And then lastly, I'll mention for fictional. Oh my gosh, if you haven't read the Red Rising series, if you like science fiction, Red Rising is just like Game of Thrones mixed with sci-fi, and it's just a whirlwind. It's a crazy good book. And then I like all of Brandon Sanderson's books. They're a bit lighter generally than the Red Rising book, but yeah, they're really good. And then I really liked Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Really cool book. Yeah.
Cool.
What
Thanks.
about you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I think the technical book for me would be one book that I read this year. It's C Programming, a Modern Approach, because I wanted to get into C programming because I
Oh wow.
was mostly learning Python and JavaScript, TypeScript, and in the beginning it was Java for Minecraft plugins, but I don't really
Oh wow.
count
That's
that.
awesome. Nice.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I wanted to get some of the deeper understanding of low-level programming, and so yeah,
Smart.
I
Yeah.
think the book was really good. I was really reading it, and then I wanted to reread it with yeah, in addition to doing like projects, some maybe some lead code problems in C, and then just referencing it to like get the double repetition.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah,
Nice.
and for non-fictional, I think for me it would be Can't Hurt Me from David Goggins.
Oh, that's a great book. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that one.
Yeah, I listened to the audiobook and I think it's really inspiring. And it really helps
It
with
is.
like the mindset and also that it like things can get hard and sometimes they have to be, and you just have to go through that.
Definitely, definitely. Are you a runner yourself?
Uh, Not really a runner, but like a gym person.
Okay, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought what was so interesting about the Can't Hurt Me book is he after you read the book and you're like motivated, you're like, wow, maybe I should run an ultra marathon. And then I was like, wait, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really loved his book. He was really, really, really yeah, he has a really strong mindset. I totally agree. Yeah, that's a great, great pick.
Yeah, I think so too. I recommend it to everyone because I think it's just
Awesome.
yeah. And from for fictional, it's The Name of the Winds. Do you know that?
Okay, name of the ones.
Yeah,
What's that one about?
it's really good. It's so it's a little bit like huh. So it's definitely fantasy, and it's like an old setting, and there's like so it's not really wizards, but there's like magic stuff. But it's usually it's more like a skill. So you can it's like alchemy. Is that the word?
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, like
and
building the potions and stuff.
yeah, and then like a little bit of magic and that. But it's like
Okay.
it's very it almost feels like it's physics and not really magic because they explain it quite
Gotcha.
well.
Okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
maybe you
Okay.
could check it
I'll
out.
add it to my list.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm
yeah.
always looking for a good fantasy book. I cannot get my wife to read any sci-fi or fantasy, but I don't know. For me personally, I think even though it's magic worlds and everything, what my favorite part of those like imaginary worlds is you can still find pieces of wisdom and pieces of like characters that you agree with or resonate with versus not. And yeah, I love that about fantasy, even though it's a fictional world. So I will definitely add Name of the Winds to my book list. So thank you for that.
And now maybe to your own book. So you wrote that you are writing a book, and I think it's a great thing. But I wanted to ask, what's your approach to writing a book? I mean, it's such a big thing.
Yeah, it's been really challenging. I think so. I'm writing it with one of he's another Netflix engineer, and he lived in New York City for a little bit, so we became pretty good friends. And so we just had the idea of we wanted to continue diving in to React and making sure we're building our own knowledge in React, even though we use it a lot. Because like we mentioned, the React world changes fast in web dev. So I would just say it's a lot easier to create the vision of the book than write it. That's what I'm finding so far. But the approach we're using is that we came up with the outline first, and then within Notion, we have the different chapters and the different sections, and then we just have assigned each other like you write this part, you write this one, and then my goal is, which I haven't been doing too well during the summer, is just write like 20 to 30 minutes a day. Instead of me saying I'm writing a book, I'm just writing for 20 to 30 minutes about React. And so I just picked it when I was doing it. I was just picked a different section, and then I'd write for 20 minutes in that section, and then the next day I would come back to it. And so at the end of doing that for a while, hopefully, we have a book after we write a lot every day. And then the second part of the approach is, so if I write the initial section or the chapter, then Faraz, I would assign it back to him as editing. So he could go through and make his changes or updates or whatever, and then that way we can make sure we're both good with the things that come out from the book. And the book is React, all React based, and just learning about React, how to build new projects with it, not fundamentals, but the advanced topics of React, or like React server components would definitely be one of those in the future. And then even just like how do you work with a project of React at work, like negotiating the timelines, building new features. What are some of the things you can do to try to make it maintainable over time? And so that's kind of like the approach and the idea of it. We still have a bit of a ways to go, but it's always been on my bucket list to write a book. So it's not really about how many people read it. It's just the accomplishment of getting through the grind of it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So, yeah, I think thank you for this talk. Thanks for educating me. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much, Philip. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. And thank you so much for having me as the first person on
Yeah,
your new podcast. I'm looking forward to listening to more.
that's great. Do you have any mentions, maybe your social media that you want to shout out?
Yeah, sure. You can follow me on Twitter at Kaleb McKelvey. So it's just straight up my name. And then I have a personal website, kalebmckelvey.com, which hopefully will be getting revamped and being a lot simpler in the future than it is today. It's a little crazy today. So yeah, shout out to those if you want to follow me or have any questions. And then the last thing I'll say is just thank you again, Philip. And I'm really happy to be part of your podcast.
Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to this first episode of Engineered Perspectives. I would really appreciate any kinds of feedback, so please don't hesitate to reach out. Stay tuned for the next episodes that will offer more perspectives on engineering. If you have a perspective and you would like to share that perspective, please let me know. Thanks again to Kaleb, and thanks to you for listening.